Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Information Revolution, a podcast for people who work in information, hopefully interesting topics, and thinking about how things are changing in the world of our work. Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Michael Upton. I'm a director of Metataxis New Zealand, based in Wellington.
And I'm Judi Vernau, and I'm also director of Metataxis New Zealand, also based in Wellington. I'm an information architect.
Great, and I'm Karl Melrose. I'm the Head of Business Development and Consulting for Leadership Through Data at Records Management Training Company. I'm based in Adelaide, in Australia.
So,
Yay.
Karl, what are we doing today?
So, the last podcast that we did, we spent about 25 minutes talking about various aspects of information architecture and, sort of points of view and those sorts of things. And we agreed afterwards the next logical thing to do, once you've got that sort of conceptual framework, was to really think about what you've already got. And that's really an information audit process, or an information survey, or everybody has a different name for it and a taxonomical bone to pick with the word that you use. And so which means that I think we really should start with you, Judi, and
right.
Let's start with what you call it, and
yeah,
work on from there.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there are lots and lots of reasons why you need to know what kind of content you've got. Lots of people call this an information audit. I think I said last time, I'd kind of shy away from that word because it smacks to me of value and making a decision about whether this is good stuff or bad stuff. So I tend to use the word information inventory, or just looking at your information landscape. When I'm being technical, I call it a physical model of the enterprise content. But you might be doing this for lots of different reasons. And so you might be doing it in order to make sure that you're complying with legislation. You need to have an information asset register, that kind of stuff. You might be doing it for mitigation of risk, which I'm certainly very familiar with doing inventories on that basis, where there's been a breach and the organization suddenly realizes they actually don't know what they've got where. So, whoops, time to find out. You might be doing it because you're wanting to move your content from here to there, wherever there is. So migration, you want to improve search, you just want to do some IT planning even, and make some better sense, rationalize your systems. So there's a lot of reasons, and there's more than that, I'm sure, why you might need to know what it is you've got. But in all of those cases, you can't really plan for the new world without being absolutely sure what you have got. It's just like, in my mind, it's like designing a house. You've got to do your overarching architecture and look at what you need for that, and you need to base the need on your requirements. So, sorry, I'm going off stream a little bit, but yes, what I want to say is that the kind of inventory or landscape that you build depends very much on what it is you're trying to do. And that can be quite a detailed process. It could take, and I've done inventories that have taken 6 months for 6 people. You could do something half decent in a week with one person and some tools to run across your shared drives or whatever it is, just to get a sense of what you've got. So it doesn't have to be a major exercise, but the key thing is, and I think there are 2 aspects of it. One aspect is, what have you actually got there? How much is there? What sort of format is it in? What are those repositories? And then the other side of it is, and what's it about actually? So, we've got this stuff, we've got, however many gigabytes, terabytes, and millions of documents. But we also need to be absolutely sure we have a high level view of what it's about as well. That's my view. My starter for 10.
I mean, the thing I like, you started to touch on there, the things that drive your audit, or whatever we're calling your inventory,
Yeah,
your inventory
whatever.
process. I mean, for me, that's the thing that I guess I see go wrong most often. I've done a few information asset registers for different organisations, and inevitably it's been because someone thought we should do one, or
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
best practice, or it's good practice, or
exactly.
in Victoria at the moment, the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner has just mandated that every government agency needs to have one, and they need to update it every couple of years. Well, if it's a compliance exercise, I mean, and I was on another podcast about this that I might see if we can link to in the show notes, about information asset registers recently. And I think there's a huge danger that you do them as a legislative, or, that kind of requirement. And,
Absolutely.
the what you were saying there too about, you can spend 6 months doing one for 6 people, or you can, get some pretty good stuff done in a week. I mean, the resolution that you're at to do your information asset register, I think, depends largely on the problems that you want to solve. Because, I mean, for want of marrying the terms up with records management, you could do one at the functional level. You could go to your business functions and say, where do you keep all your stuff? And they could tell you, and you could have it done in, and then you could stick at the sort of file server level instead of going lower, or something like that. And you could be done in an afternoon for your whole organization, and possibly fulfill, a large portion of that requirement. But, the things that I keep finding are that you've got organizations that they have real problems with findability. They have real problems with, naming conventions and those sorts of things. And if those things aren't driving your audit process, if you're not coming to your audit process saying, here are the problems that we want to solve and need to solve through this audit, I think you're going to go wrong. And it's
Absolutely.
probably the least discussed part of the whole
Yeah.
thing. What problem are you solving through your audit process?
Yeah. Yeah, if you just actually need to know how much stuff there is, how old it is, what kinds of things it is, yeah, you can do that really, really quickly just with some tools running across whatever your repositories are. And that can tell you a lot.
What I mean, I know we don't want to get into sort of tooling discussions, but I just get crickets every time I ask people about the tools that they use to do this stuff. And I'm really curious about it, because I've always approached this as an interview process. It's kind of, you go and you sit with a team, and, you
Right.
budget a couple of hours, and these are the activities you've got, right? Where do you get the information, for those activities, what formats it in,
Sure.
risk classes, those sorts of things. But it's an interview process. And the thing I've always been really conscious of with that is that I just feel like it's going to miss a lot of stuff, because you've got the unknown unknowns, you've got the edge case where only
Yeah,
one person remembers where that stuff is because it's on
absolutely.
microfilm in a
And
basement
if
somewhere.
if you actually need to do that depth of inquiry, you have to do it from both ends. So you do have to go and interview everybody, but you also have to do it from the technology end, if you like, so that you're finding out. So, for example, I can remember doing something where we asked people where they stored stuff on the shared drives. And then you also get your shared drives report from Tree Size or SolarWinds or whatever it is. And then you've got to match the two up, which is, of course, when you discover that there's all this stuff out there with no owner, that nobody knows what the hell it
Yeah.
is. So even though you've done your team by team exercise, yeah,
And
it does not match.
that's exactly where you discover the kind of digital version of the, sealed basement that no one knew
Yes.
about. Because your system reporting tells you, there's X million files that haven't been touched for 5 years, and they all sit under this folder that only IT can see. So what is this? And then, so of course it becomes a critical aspect of the exercise, or it can be,
Can be.
totally depending on what you're trying to achieve. But if what you're trying to achieve is a totality of what you've got, like what's the extent of the information and where is it, then yeah, you have to then start scratching the surface of that stuff, or at least agree what you do next, I suppose. Yeah. One thing that I thought I would throw in there that's actually quite a general thing, but definitely relates to this whole topic of why are we doing this? Like, one of the most critical things that I've been taught in relatively recent years to ask is just, so what? So just this idea that I've got this information, so what? I've found this out, well, so what? This kind of, it's a slightly confrontational version of business analysts have that technique called 5 whys, where you ask why, why do you do this thing?
Why? Yep.
Yeah, but what? Yeah, but why? You keep going into the detail to try and actually understand the underlying reason, or it's kind of trying to draw out root cause. And and I guess I just wanted to throw that in there because I think in terms of approaching, pretty much anything I do in my work, but also specifically with these kinds of things, this kind of stock take idea, just throwing in a new name for it. Asking, well, so what? Like, if we had this information, well, so what? If we knew X, what's actually going to change? Like, that's always what's on my mind.
Yeah.
And if people cannot articulate, once I've finished this exercise, we will be able to do something. We'll be able to do something different, or we can kick off the next thing that we've got in mind. Then I don't want to do it. I just think. Just don't stop wasting time, basically.
You can also do it in stages.
Yep.
So you can do a really high level view, that really quick and dirty view, and discover, as a government department did last year, that they'd still got a whole bundle of records that they'd transferred them to another agency, but they still had them, and they didn't.
Okay.
And a lot of data. So you could get rid of that.
Brilliant.
Because it's
already been transferred.
It's already been transferred.
Yep.
So that's good. You can say, but we've got this duplicated here and here, so we could get rid of that lot. We've got this stuff that's really old, and we are absolutely certain that we don't need it anymore. So that kind of rationalization is a quick win.
Yeah, and I guess in a roundabout way, what we're actually saying here is, and this just goes back to your first point, I guess, Judi, about the idea that you do this for many reasons. We've sort of started off with a conversation that led from talking about information architecture and this idea as an early activity in developing an information architecture, but it's also, as we're saying, useful for all kinds of other purposes. And one of those things can be rationalizing all this junk. And once you've basically ditched that and that dross, then you may have a clearer idea of what it is that you need to architect for, because you might say, well, actually, we're not going to spend time trying to categorize or group or describe crap.
Yes.
We're going to just focus on the things that we're going to retain and keep using. And another thing that's been on my mind is, I've recently been working on the development of what New Zealand would call a disposal authority. And in doing that kind of work where, you're doing the functional analysis and all that fun stuff, it's inevitable, I think, that you identify where sets of information are, any kind of idea of ownership, even if it's kind of not very formal, or, people are doing a bit of the bag's knot. And I found it pretty much impossible to resist trying to capture further information about sort of, what systems things are in and what talks to what. And
the main other point that has been sort of picking up constantly for me, is just one of these points that I think I've made on something else we did ages ago about metadata needing to be catalytic, it needing to actually drive a specific action. Every audit process that I've ever been involved in has ended up as basically a spreadsheet of some kind, or it's ended up in a it's ended up in a tool that might as well be a spreadsheet, because realistically it's got columns and rows and cells and stuff.
Okay.
But so you're building a schema. That's the first thing you do. And if you are adding something to that, why are you adding it? What's the business process? What action will you take? How often does the business process run? Who's responsible for its governance? I think really asking, and it might be a 5 whys kind of thing, why do we need to capture this? Why is that important? Who is going to run that process? what impact is it going to have on the organization if we don't do it? Asking those things every single time you add a column, because I think, as you say, Michael, we see this with metadata in EDRMS systems. There is a huge temptation to just, keep adding metadata. And, particularly if, you're talking to people who are of a more archival type bent, they want to capture all of the context data that they possibly can, because one day you might need it, without thinking about how that's going to impact on, just how many things people need to do to actually keep that record, and what impact that's going to have on whether the record gets kept. I think information asset registers are the same. I did one for a council a couple of years ago, and I think we ended up with about 1,700 rows in that, what ended up being a spreadsheet. It was gigantic, and I don't remember how many columns, but it was a lot. Yeah. But, we had a bunch of quite specific objectives that we were aiming at. We workshopped that. We spent a lot of time workshopping that with the organisation we did it for, to say, right, why do you need to know this? Because, the first thing that, the natural tendency was to start with a template that had come from somewhere, because it gives you something to think about. Yep. But then we ended up removing a bunch of columns, adding a bunch of others that became really important for things they wanted to do in the future. And I think if you don't go through that process, I think if you don't say, right, why are we putting this column in? Who is going to be responsible for this? What actions is it going to drive? Who's going to own them? When are they going to do them? Get really specific. Again, I think you just add a lot of stuff that just becomes more rot, more crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's always true. I'm absolutely horrified by your giant spreadsheets, by the
way. What do you use?
We have used a number of things, but it works well. It can be quite a nice SharePoint list if you use something like InfoPath to gather the content, gather the data, and then put those in a list so that you can sort by, does this contain personal information or not? For example, let's sort by what's physical, what's databases, what's, sort it in any way. One time we did a really nice one that was all in XML, actually, and just therefore presented out again however you want it. So you can sort it and do all kinds of nice things with it. But SharePoint works well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we did one in a very early SharePoint for a council, local authority in the UK, which was in 2002 or something, and they're still using it. They are still keeping it up to date.
20 years down the track.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a commitment. That is a good sign.
Yeah. I mean, that suggests obvious, business value, that it's not just someone just doing a sort of pet project. Yeah.
Judi, do you ever have the problem how often do you have to deal with the problem of the underlying stuff changing while you're in the middle of a project? And how do you deal with that?
In terms of this information stock take, do you mean?
Yeah. It just occurred to me, I mean, when we're talking about over 20 years, but I mean, if you're doing a project and it's a 2-year project, I would imagine there are reasonable changes even over that period of time.
Well, it's true. And of course, if you're focusing on just quantities and that kind of stuff, then they're going to be going up, even while you're asking the question, it's going to be going up. So you can only say, well, this is actually the best thing to do around that is say, well, this is what it was when I started this project at the beginning of the month. And this is what it is in terms of quantity. This is what it is at the end of the month. So you can make some, you can do some extrapolation around that, what it might mean going forwards. In terms of other things, I do think it's tricky. I did one very big inventory for the NHS, who were having data coming in and then processing and going out again. And they really, really needed to keep track of those things. So each of those sets was coming in and needed to be recorded. And then what else have we got in the organization for other reasons, compliance, but also what are we generating? And what's the relationship between these things? And that was something that was obviously changing all the time. So
fantastic.
yeah, we
Well,
could
I
only
mean,
we could only do it at the time and encourage them to keep it up to date. I don't know how well that went, but I
yeah,
think they felt that they needed to get some handle on it, because at the time when they commissioned the work, they were feeling really quite, we just don't know. So at
yeah,
least you can know at that point.
yeah,
And
yeah, that's right.
yeah,
And as you say, if you can kind of measure the sort of the direction things are going, then that's
yeah,
also useful, because typically if these things come back to deciding what you want to do next and how you're going to prioritize stuff, which is often true. It's about like, well, where do we put our efforts and what do we focus on? Then if you've identified that something is growing rapidly and it's already got a high risk profile for whatever reason, then it's like, cool, okay,
yes,
I don't actually need to know the exact numbers. I just need to know that this is a risk and it looks like it's getting bigger.
yeah.
So yeah, I think while things will be in flux sometimes, I'm not sure. Yeah, I wonder how often that actually
Mm,
matters. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
an interesting sideshow. I mean,
Mm.
I see lots of organizations, and I mean, I think the things that you could probably learn about just how much work teams are doing from their file creation rates and those sorts of things, and I don't think most managers actually know those sorts of statistics, and I think they would absolutely love to. I
Right.
think
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder.
just for resource planning and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would. I'm sure you're not saying this, Karl, but I'd definitely caution any manager who thought that the number of files you were creating was a sign of productivity, and like it tells you something, but of course you just want to be sensible about it, because I managed to make 7 million documents today doesn't really tell you anything about what I
No.
actually delivered to the organization.
See,
No.
Yeah,
one of the
yeah,
statistics that we quite like to feed back to organizations is the number of documents in the organization per employee, which can really make people go,
yeah,
"What?" Um,
yeah,
and obviously that, each employee has not created that number of documents because it's been done over time, but still, when you think, my God, there are 35,000 documents in this organization, you know, just me, that's pretty overworked for each person working here. There are 35,000 documents.
yeah,
It's yeah, it is a bit mind blowing, even though, logically it doesn't correlate like that.
See, I
yeah,
mean, I think I think you can make really good predictions about these things, though, too. One of the things that, I was at an organization selling a collaboration product that was licensed per document at one point, and
Right.
um, and it was, oh, look, you bought 50,000, 100,000, those kinds of things, and it was. The thing that was really interesting coming out of that was going back afterwards and actually looking at how those documents were being created on a sort of case by case basis. And the thing that I kept finding was amazing consistency across long periods of time. You'd hit an average and you'd just stick at it. And I think things like that can be really interesting for planning, because while I wouldn't say that file creation or something like that or document creation is a mark of productivity. If you're an organization and you manage cases on a specific topic, there are going to be some mathematical certainties
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
in those
yeah,
sorts of things. And if
Yeah.
you can start to understand what those are, then I think you can start to do some really smart planning around all kinds of things, from
Yeah.
employee capacity to storage to you know
yeah,
starting to get into the productivity aspects of it, like,
yeah,
well, every single time we do this, we do these things. Why don't we do some automation around that and actually make it,
yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
actually do
yeah,
something for people's
Yeah.
productivity? Because we
yeah,
know that we do it 35,000 times a year and it takes an hour.
absolutely. And if you knew you did, 100 cases a year and each one required 5,000 documents or something, and you can start to kind of think about, well, what's that going to mean for people in the future? So
Mm.
the people trying to do the work, do they need to refer to the past cases? Yes, they do. Oh, okay. Well, basically they're
Exactly.
going to get this increasing volume of stuff that they have to deal with. So what would we
Exactly.
do to architect that so that then they can find what they need and do their jobs? So yeah, I think all those kind of metrics are definitely really valuable, which I'm sure we have just been saying over and over. One possibly last thing I want to throw in the mix is that in this conversation, I'm really conscious of the fact that we haven't been splitting hairs over whether we're talking about things that are in an EDRMS, things that are on a shared drive,
Right.
things that are data or not, line of business systems. I think that I suspect, so long as I'm on these things, a recurrent theme of this podcast is going to be the fact that managing information requires thinking about information in a form agnostic way.
Yeah.
And that some of the most critical records of government are in line of business systems.
Absolutely.
They're in applications. They're not.
Yeah.
You're right. We should have made that
exercise.
We should have made that clear up front, because that's how I think. It's everything. It's business systems. It's paper repositories. It's microfilm.
It's that.
EDRMS, file servers.
It's that bunch of CDs in the corner that nobody's looked at for however
exactly.
long.
So I think it's one of those things that the three of us probably are at that point of taking it for granted because we're always ranting about these kinds of topics. But I do just want to call that out for all of you listening to this, is that whenever we're talking, we're not going to be talking about what's in my little carefully managed system. We're talking about the totality of what the organisation has.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the changes of form are the big information architecture decisions. We've got all this stuff over here and it's amazingly consistent. Why isn't it in a business system? We have a whole bunch of forms here and we have this process that keeps producing forms. Well, why isn't that a business system? Because then we can automate all of this stuff.
Sure.
I think those sorts of things, I think they're the big information architecture decisions and the ones that can really drive the productivity of the organization. So good pickup, because I think we would have missed that one.
Very good.
All right.
I think that's us.
It is. Thanks, guys. This has been an absolute pleasure, as always.
See you next time.
Catch you all next time. See ya.
Bye.